Chapter 4. Transportation. But no more villainy came from Exon and his cronies during the rest of the passage. They were a week out of Bristol when the brawl took place. On the 8th day, they ran into bad weather. For the next month, the ship was mauled by a ceaseless chain of gales, severe even for the Atlantic. She leaked like a basket, tossing and straining in the tremendous seas, and wallowed along sluggishly in the very teeth of the wind. If the conditions in the 'tween decks had been bad before, they now became so utterly hideous that Guy wondered at times whether they were really happening, or whether he was caught up in some awful nightmare. But the time crept on, and nothing seemed to change. The poor convicts were reduced to helpless sickness. In the loathsome pit where they lay, all was now awash in a vile surge of sea water. Nothing could escape its defilement, stained as it was with the beastliness it carried. To a man they were prostrate, many of them certain that the hulk was sinking under them, and even glad to think it. A few died and were dragged out when the crew could find time to do the job, in the intervals of pumping and working the ship. It was 5 more weeks before the weather moderated, and they dropped anchor in an American port. By that time, all were so reduced by exhaustion and disease that most of them had barely the strength to crawl, when the hatches were knocked off and they were ordered up on deck. Blinking like owls they stood in a bewildered mob, while the soldiers yelled at them and got them in some kind of order. After so long in darkness, the sunlight hurt their eyes, and their limbs were so cramped and feeble that it hurt them to move. Guy felt the strength return to him as the first draught of the clean salt air filled his lungs. The wind blew gently through his hair while he gazed about him, interested, in spite of himself, at his first sight of a new country. They were lying in a wide sound, so far across that the other shore could only be seen as a low misty line on the horizon. On the beach nearest to them, a town sprawled. A scattered array of fine buildings at the edge of the water, mixed with rough log cabins and sheds. There were trees everywhere, and the soil was black and rich. He learned that the town was Norfolk, in the colony of Virginia, and the inlet was the mouth of the James River. A great deal of shipping lay at anchor around them, from great gilded men-of-war to small fleet skiffs and sailing craft, plying here and there. It was a busy scene. Soon they were taken ashore and marched off to a jail near the wharfs. It was an unlovely spot, but compared with the quarters they had left, it was luxury. Here they were given a meal of porridge, after being checked and counted with a great palaver of signing them over by the officer who had conducted them on the voyage. Next day they were told to strip and wash, and got an issue of clean linen breeches and shirts, to replace the stinking rags they cast off. By now their spirits had risen, and they had begun to recover from the miseries of the passage. Seated with Riach in the prison yard, Guy enjoyed the gentle sunshine. Spring was on the way. Beyond the palisade the trees budded lustily. Powdered with green, they glowed with the new leaves that thrust eagerly from their bursting cups. "This is better than anything we have had until now," he said. "If we were not prisoners, I could find it in me to be happy even." Riach nodded. "It is better than the ship," he agreed. "Man, I was thinking we would never more see daylight in yon floating kennel." "Be happy if you can, Guy," another voice joined in the conversation, "and make the best of this while you may. There is nothing so bad, but it can be worse." The speaker was Alistair Macleod, lounging near them in the sun. The tall Scot smiled at Guy's retort. "Perhaps you had other things to occupy your mind, but I don't remember that you said anything in the ship." McLeod reached out to tussle his already shaggy hair before he could duck. "You have a big crow for a young cockerel," he chuckled. "Though it does you credit, I will say. I have not forgot how you stood up to Exon and his bullies, youngster though you are." Alistair was a tall, lean man with wide shoulders. His teeth glinted white against his swarthy skin, and his beard and hair were black as jet. Guy guessed that he had seen many adventures, for his body bore the white scars of old wounds, and he had the composed air of a man of the world. Now that he had the chance to see his fellow sufferers in daylight, Guy looked at them with interest. He already knew what Riach looked like, of course, as the short stocky Highlander had been with him before the voyage. Exon and his two jackals drew his glance most strongly. In the daylight, Exon did not seem at all formidable. He was a grey, middle-aged man, with a kindly, smug expression, which was marred by a defect in one eye. One pale green iris held a look of mild innocence, but the other had a white fleck in the centre, where the pupil should be. It gave him an oddly sinister look. He got up from where he was loafing and came towards them, followed by his two ruffians. Amazingly, Gil had recovered from the stab he had received. Only his tremendous strength had cured him, for the conditions in the surgeon's cockpit were far worse even than in the prison hold, and were enough in themselves to kill anyone who was not a very hard case indeed. For all that, the pugilist seemed hale enough, though his face was drawn and his immense frame worn down to gaunt skin and bone. His nose was smashed flat with his face, and huge crags of brows jutted over his little pig-like eyes. He was like an enormous ape, with his long arms and short bowed legs. Smeaton, the flash cull, had a red scar across his jaw where the fettered link had hit him. Tall and well made, he had traces of dignity, and had been handsome once. Now he scowled and swaggered with the shifty arrogance of a town bully, as he lounged behind the false and smiling Exon. Exon drew up in front of the three seated figures, and beamed down on them. His voice was smooth and oily, and he cleared his throat before speaking. "Well, my bold blades, it's a fair pleasure to meet ye this fine morning, so it is, and on my word, you're every bit as good-looking as I'd fancied you to be, back there in the dark, where I couldn't see your faces." His smile widened when they did not answer, and he went on. "And there's the lad, too, a likely young cove. Proper game chicken, ain't he, Seth? Look at him scowl." Gil loomed over them in the sunshine, fierce and terrible. "Which of ye's the rat as pinked me?" he demanded in a hoarse growl. "Who was it, I say?" Riach sprang up with a defiant snarl. "It was myself, let your black blood," he spat, "but not a sufficiency of it." His hand was buried in the breast of his shirt. In his excitement he fell into his own tongue, adding something which none of them had trouble in understanding. He was willing to do it again and make a better job of it, if Gil liked. Now, Exon's smooth tone broke in to quell the squabble. "We don't want no violence, boys. Seth only wanted to say he was sorry you took his little joke the wrong way at the time, and he didn't mean no harm. That was it, Seth, my old flower, wasn't it?" Gil's frightful scowl did not confirm this, but he said nothing. Exon went on. "We been thinking you and us could do a few smart things together, in a manner of speaking." He spoke carelessly, in a bland, creamy purr that went well with his respectable grey head and kindly smirk. "What sort of things?" McLeod asked dryly. "For one, there's yourself, as is a gentleman born and a true soldier, and then there's the little redhead, and he's a man of his hands, and the boy, who's flying and a game plucked un. Besides, you've a dozen or two likely fellers as'll do what you tell 'em, ain't ye?" He paused, and his mild, treacherous smile widened as Alistair snapped, "Well?" "A good crowd of bullies led by men with naught to lose, and who know what's o'clock, could do well in this far country. Take them ships lying out there, snug at their berths. A few stout lads might grab one and sail her out, if the job was planned right. There'd be good pickings on the high seas afterwards." A wry smile twisted Alistair's lips. "There is about one fly in that pot of honey, my friend," he said. "First, who would sail your ship if you took her? And again, who would fight her against the German upstarts men of war that cruise off these coasts as thick as kites around a dead ewe?" Exon's face fell. "Aye, you have a thing there. It would need skilled men. But perhaps you've got ideas of your own, pal?" "We have." This time the Highlander's voice was cold and crisp, edged with biting scorn. "One of them is that we are honest men, sentenced by a law we do not recognise. We will not be fouling our names by joining in villainy with such knaves as you, and that is our last word to you." For a moment Exon had no reply. His genial smirk left him suddenly, and a wicked glare took its place. At the change, Guy saw what depths of evil lay beneath the mask he normally wore. Sheer, naked murder blazed from the old scoundrel's good eye. But his tone was soft when he answered. "So that's your tune, is it, my pinchbeck Sawney? All right. But if you cross Bill Exon in the future, it'll be a sorry day's work for ye, mark that." With the threat, he turned on his heel and flung away angrily. The irons on his legs hampered his stride, so that he had to take short, mincing little paces. The fetters clinked loud with the baffled force of his movements, and men glanced up curiously to stare at him as he passed. Seth Gill lingered to glower at them. It was in the prize fighter's mind to attack them, as Guy could see, but after an uncertain growl he thought better of it. Followed by Smeaton, he lumbered off in the wake of his chief. "Do you think we'll have trouble with them?" Guy was anxious, watching them go. Alistair chuckled grimly. "Indeed, that is possible," he replied. "But if we do, be sure they will be getting more than their share of it." Guy bent a frowning stare after the three rogues. In the bright sunshine, their figures seemed to loom to a great size all at once. In an eerie fashion their shadows made the fine radiance of the day fade suddenly, and cast a chill on the air. He shivered. Though he could not tell why, he knew they promised ill luck.